Once the dragon Yuan pill took effect, the elemental energy dragon grew enormous and appeared behind him. Its eyes began to shine, indicating to him that it was ready to attack. He assumed an offensive stance, stomped forcefully on the ground, breaking it into pieces. Then he tightly gripped his sword and stared fiercely at Jong, determined this time to finish him off. His energy was so strong that the rocks around him began to float. Jong started looking at the dragon and couldn't help but be terrified. He didn't know if he would be able to withstand the attack. The man with blue hair began unsheathing his sword and prepared to attack. This time he decided to use technique number 2 of the 9 Kongning styles. At that moment, he used the ability called the Descending Dragon's Cut and launched a powerful attack towards Jong. In doing so, his body began to emit a powerful energy, and in the blink of an eye, the elemental energy dragon started advancing quickly towards him. It opened its mouth and prepared to finish him off. At that moment, the girl stood in front of Jong. She extended her hands towards the attack and with a determined look, used the Earth Eternal Shield once again. Jong put his elbow in front of his face, turned his head towards her, and upon seeing that despite being injured she was willing to block another attack, he couldn't help but be somewhat surprised. In an instant, a green shield appeared around them. Upon seeing this, the spiritual dragon began to attack the shield, breaking part of the ground and creating a curtain of smoke in the process. While she had her hands extended towards the shield and was blocking the attack, she closed her eyes, clenched her teeth tightly, and explained to Jong that because the man had taken Xiao family's secret dragon Yuan pill, now the strength of the dragon had multiplied several times. Now her shield would not be able to withstand the attack at all, which meant they were doomed. In a matter of seconds, little by little the shield began to crack. Upon seeing this, she decided to use her last bit of strength to hold on as long as possible. Jong grabbed his cloak with his finger, started looking at the spiritual dragon and couldn't help but be amazed and think that the man with blue hair was really strong since each strike from the dragon was a deadly move. The previous attack had already been astonishing, so he didn't expect him to unleash such power. The man with blue hair jumped, approached them, and began to stare at Jong. When he saw that the shield was starting to crack, he couldn't help but smile. He used the Descending Dragon's Cut several times, launching powerful slashes towards the shield. Jong returned his gaze and reached out his hand towards the sky, activating the swarm of insects mark. Seeing that he was a ruthless and powerful person, he decided not to show any mercy. Several seconds later, once the girl's shield broke, several thousand insects began to emerge from Jong's hand and appeared in the sky. The man with blue hair looked up and upon seeing so many insects, he couldn't help but be shocked. He clenched his teeth tightly and started wondering what was happening. While thousands of insects were coming out of Jong's hand, he began to stare at the man with blue hair and asked him to get ready. The girl who was sitting on the floor behind him put a hand on her shoulder where she had the wound, started looking at Jong with a surprised look and began to wonder if he really belonged to the creation class. Several insects appeared around Jong and began to look at the man with blue hair, ready to attack. Jong started approaching him and gave the order for the insects to attack. Upon hearing this, he clenched his teeth tightly and couldn't help but panic. He knew that if so many insects attacked him at once, he wouldn't have any chance of winning. Upon hearing Jong's order, the insects began to advance towards him and prepared to attack. Seeing the number of insects, he unsheathed his sword and assumed a defensive stance. With a serious look on his face, he started staring intently at Jong and used the Descending Dragon Cut. By doing this, his sword emitted a powerful energy. He was not willing to give up as they were just some smelly insects. With little effort, he started cutting the insects into pieces, while Jong's body was releasing the poisonous mist from Little Nine. With a penetrating look, he reached out his hand towards him and asked if he truly believed this. The bodies of the injured insects began to regenerate. Seeing that the insects could regenerate, he couldn't help but be shocked and wonder how this was possible. Several seconds later, they started advancing towards him and began attacking again. He began to defend himself from the attack using his sword, in the process cutting the bodies of several insects in half, which quickly started to regenerate again. Upon seeing this, he couldn't help but panic as he couldn't believe that he truly couldn't kill them. While the insects were emerging from Jong's body, with a serious look on his face, he began to stare at him intently and decided to see how long he could endure. The girl who was behind him turned her head towards him and with a surprised look, she couldn't help but be shocked and wonder how powerful he was. Upon hearing Jong's mockery, he became furious, swinging the sword forcefully and using once again the skill Descending Dragon Cut, cutting the body of an insect that was in front of him in half. The spiritual dragon manifested again, opened its mouth, and began devouring the insects. He had used this attack because the dragon could continue devouring the insects without allowing them to regenerate. While he had his guard down, one of the insects approached him from behind and gave him a strong bite on the arm, poisoning him and causing him to drop his sword in the process. Upon feeling the bite, he turned his head to the side and upon seeing the insect, clenched his teeth tightly and thought that this was not good at all. Now that his right hand was poisoned, he couldn't use the sword. Now that he had no other choice, he put his hand into his clothes and pulled out a red object. The insects took advantage of this opportunity and began to approach him quickly, but he took the object out of his clothes, raised it to the sky, and used the technique called jade protection of life. At that moment, a powerful red energy started to appear around his body. He mocked Jong by asking if he believed he could kill the great Xiao Yuan Wu with a few insignificant insects. Jong simply stood there silently observing him without saying a word. He reached out his hand towards Yuan Wu, began to stare at him intently with a serious look and asked him what kind of treasure this was and how it had such power. After saying this, he ordered the insects to devour him. The object had created a shield around Yuan Wu's body. The insects followed Jong's order and started attacking the shield, but no matter how hard they tried, it was in vain. Seeing this, he quickly realized that the attack hadn't even made a scratch on the shield. While Yuan Wu was covering the wound from the insect bite on his arm with his hand, he turned his head towards Jong and advised him not to waste his energy since it was the inherited treasure of the Xiao family called Jade Treasure, which had divine powers. Jong refused and ordered the insects to attack again. Yuan Wu stared at him and explained that once the Jade Treasure was activated, the shield could block all external attacks. With this shield, Jong would not be able to harm him anymore. Jong simply remained silent. While the insects continued to attack the shield, Yuan Wu began to approach them. Upon seeing that he was able to control the insects and bring him to the point of using the ancestral treasure, he couldn't help but praise him for being amazing. He also added that even if Jong used all his cards up his sleeve, he wouldn't be able to harm him. Seeing the man approaching, the girl stood up and grabbed Jong by his clothes. Within seconds, he started bleeding from his mouth and approached Jong. With a smile, he decided to make him an offer one last time. As long as Jong was willing to follow and obey him, he could allow him to join the Xiao family and grant him the Xiao surname, something many dreamed of achieving. After saying this, he asked Jong to think it over carefully and not miss out on this opportunity. Jong began to look at him with a calm gaze and remained silent, thinking for several seconds. He started to stare fixedly at Yuan Wu and couldn't help but get angry when he saw that he had become accustomed to being conceited, to the point where he couldn't even see the situation he was in. Upon hearing this, the girl turned her head towards him and with a confused look, began to wonder what Jong was up to. He approached Jong, extended his hand to the side, and with a smile asked him to stop bragging. It didn't matter to him if Jong accepted or not because even if he couldn't kill him today, he could do it any other day. With the influence of the Xiao family throughout the country, he wouldn't be able to hide or confront them. Jong began to stare at Yuan Wu intently and with a smile, he reminded him of his own words that one couldn't investigate if there was nothing to find. After saying this, he asked him what could happen if he died without leaving any trace. At that moment, a giant tentacle struck the ground. Upon hearing this sound, Yuan Wu slightly turned his head back and with a gaze filled with terror, he started wondering what was happening. This tentacle belonged to the insect mother. She emerged from the swarm of insects and appeared behind them. Upon seeing how enormous she was, the girl fell to the ground. Yuan Wu looked up and upon seeing how huge and terrifying she was, he started sweating. At that moment, Jong gave her the order to devour him. Upon hearing his command, Little Nine began to approach Yuan Wu and thank Jong as she was very hungry. Upon hearing this, Yuan Wu's expression changed drastically. He started feeling a fear that he had never felt before in his life. Little Nine began to smile and using her tentacle, she attacked Yuan Wu's shield. Due to her enormous strength, his body was sent flying and crashed into the wall, breaking it into pieces. He started screaming in agony, unable to believe that a monster like Little Nine actually existed. He asked Jong what kind of monster she was. With a calm look, Jong explained to him that Little Nine had just finished reproducing herself, so he and the jade were exactly what she needed to satisfy her hunger. Little Nine began to repeatedly hit Yuan Wu using her tentacle, creating a large curtain of smoke in the process. In a matter of seconds, the shield started breaking into pieces. He opened his mouth and started screaming in pain, questioning why the shield had broken so easily. He began to bleed from his mouth and fell to the ground. He couldn't believe that this was happening. Now the fate of the Xiao family and the jade were going to disappear. Now that the shield had been broken, Little Nine started to stare at him intently. She began to bring her tentacle closer to him and decided to deliver the final blow. With a cold expression, Jong remained silently observing this. Little Nine attacked Yuan Wu, destroying the ground into pieces in the process. Her attack had been so powerful that all that was left of Yuan Wu was a pool of blood. She began to lift the tentacle from the ground, and Jong thought that no one should find out about this since Yuan Wu was now dead. He started walking, reached his hand towards the sky, activated the swarm mark, and gave Little Nine the order to transform. Several seconds later, Little Nine transformed, returned to human form, and hugged him. Then, she closed her eyes and with a smile explained that Yuan Wu was delicious. She thanked him and also added that she was the one who loved him the most. The girl who was sitting on the floor turned her head to the side, and upon seeing Little Nine, she couldn't help but feel somewhat confused and scared. Jong turned his back on her, started to walk away, and decided to take a look at the Xiao family. At that moment, he turned his head towards her and decided to take care of her. The girl who was sitting on the floor panicked and couldn't help but sweat. She remembered that she now knew his secret, and thinking about this, she couldn't help but wonder if he was going to kill her to keep her silent. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.